When the news of Menglong's death broke, the world froze. Fans refused to believe it. The internet flooded with disbelief, memories, and endless replayed clips of his gentle smile, that same smile that had once brightened millions of screens, hiding a darkness no one had cared enough to see. But days later, when a letter was discovered in his apartment, neatly folded beside an old photograph and an unlit candle, the truth behind that smile finally began to speak. It wasn't a suicide note in the traditional sense. There were no dramatic words of blame, no bitterness bleeding across the page. Instead, it was quiet, haunting, and heartbreakingly sincere, a letter written to everyone and no one. A farewell to a world that had celebrated his perfection but ignored his pain. It was the voice of a man who had spent years performing happiness for a crowd that demanded it, even when his own heart was breaking in silence. In the letter, written in his small, deliberate handwriting, Menglong began with 3 words that would later echo across the internet. I tried, truly. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession, the kind of truth that only comes when a person has nothing left to protect. He wrote about the noise that surrounded him, the endless expectations that came with fame, and the unbearable loneliness that lived between his smiles and scripted lines. To everyone else, he had it all, the fame, the fortune, the beauty, the fans. But behind the flashing lights, he wrote of nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone would still care if he stopped pretending. The discovery of the letter changed everything. What had first been a mystery, a sudden, tragic death, became a devastating portrait of emotional exhaustion. He had left the letter in plain sight, not hidden in a drawer, not tucked away in secrecy. It sat on his desk, beside his half-finished lyrics and a photo of himself and his friends taken years ago, before the fame. The ink on the page had smudged slightly, as though touched by tears, and maybe it had been. Menglong's words painted a chillingly honest picture of his final days. He wrote of feeling invisible despite being constantly seen, unheard despite always speaking. He described the strange emptiness of being loved by millions but known by none. They love the version of me that smiles, he wrote, but not the one that cries. It was a line that tore through the hearts of fans who had idolized him for years, forcing them to realize how much they had admired the image, not the man. Those close to him later said that he had become more withdrawn in the weeks before his death. He avoided calls, cancelled shoots, and spent hours alone in his apartment, writing. They thought he was preparing for a new project, a role, perhaps, or a song. No one knew he was preparing his final message instead. His assistant recalled finding pieces of paper scattered around his desk, filled with fragments of thoughts, as if he had been trying to arrange his feelings into something that could finally make sense. The final letter was the only one that remained whole. What makes the letter even more tragic was its tenderness. There was no anger in it, only exhaustion. He thanked his fans for their love, even though he admitted he sometimes felt unworthy of it. He apologized to his parents for not being stronger. He asked forgiveness from someone he called the one I never stopped thinking about, whose identity remains a mystery to this day. And then, in his final lines, he wrote something that felt like a whisper across eternity. Maybe if I leave quietly, the world will finally listen. Those words became a haunting refrain. Across social media, fans began to quote them, pairing them with his pictures, his music, his old interviews. It was as if he had finally been heard, but too late. The letter revealed the deep emotional fractures fame had carved into him. He spoke about the industry pressures, how every smile was rehearsed, how every emotion had to fit a brand. He wrote that he missed being ordinary, missed the silence before applause. He missed the boy he used to be, the one who sang because it healed him, not because it sold records. In one passage, he wrote about the weight of perfection. The world never forgives imperfection, he confessed. So I learned to hide it until I forgot who I was beneath it. Those who knew him say that line was the most painful to read. It was true. Menglong had built a career on gentleness, warmth, and sincerity. He had always been the soft soul of Chinese entertainment, kind, humble, quiet. But the pressure to maintain that image had become a silent cage. He could never break character, not even when the lights went out. The letter also revealed his quiet fear of fading away. "When I'm gone," he wrote, "they will remember the roles, not the person, the scenes, not the scars." And in that simple reflection lay the deepest ache of all, the fear of being forgotten, even while being seen by millions. It wasn't just about fame. It was about being human in a world that had turned him into a symbol. After the letter became public, it changed the way people saw him. His interviews were replayed with new meaning. The long pauses, the faint hesitations in his voice, the way he smiled when asked if he was happy. Everything took on new weight. His fans began to look back and realize how many times he had hinted at his pain without saying it outright. He had spoken in metaphors, through lyrics, through silences. The world simply hadn't been listening. His final act, writing that letter, wasn't a cry for attention. It was a plea for understanding. It wasn't meant to shock. It was meant to reveal. It was the voice of a man who had spent too long suppressing his own truth for the comfort of others. And when he finally spoke it, it was in ink, not in words, because the world that applauded him on stage had no room for his sadness of it. In the days following the release of the letter, fans visited the places he once loved, the cafe where he used to write, the riverside park he mentioned in interviews, the small studio where he recorded his last song. They left flowers, letters, and handwritten notes, answers to the one he left behind. "We hear you now," many of them wrote. "We're sorry we didn't before." It's impossible to read Menglong's letter without feeling both heartbreak and guilt. It forces the world to confront a painful question: how many artists, smiling under the spotlight, are silently drowning beneath it? His story became a mirror reflecting not just his pain, but society's indifference to the quiet suffering of those who entertain us. 4 months after his death, his letter remained the most shared message online, not because of its tragedy, but because of its truth. It resonated with everyone who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or trapped behind expectations. It was the final gift of a man who could not save himself, but whose words might save someone else. As time passes, Menglong's letter continues to live on, quoted in documentaries, studied in fan forums, even taught in creative writing classes as a testament to emotional honesty. It reminds the world that fame is not immunity to loneliness, that behind every curated smile, there may be an untold story waiting for someone to care enough to ask. And somewhere in those pages, between apologies and memories, between sorrow and gratitude, Menglong left one final truth for the world that never listened. "I wanted to be loved for who I really am, but maybe I was never brave enough to show it." That single line, tender, devastating, and unbearably human, remains his true legacy. Not the fame, not the applause, but the courage to finally tell the truth, even when no one was there to hear it. In the end, the letter they found too late wasn't just his goodbye. It was a mirror held up to us all, asking whether we truly see the people we claim to love. And though he's gone, his words linger like a quiet echo in the hearts of those who read them. Because somewhere, between his sentences and silences, Menglong finally found a voice that even death could not take away. The night before his death, the city outside his apartment window shimmered like 1,000 unspoken words. Rain whispered against the glass, and the world below moved on, unaware that Menglong was writing his final goodbye. His apartment was dimly lit, the flicker of a single candle throwing long, soft shadows across the walls. The same walls that had heard his laughter, his music, his quiet weeping. He sat at his desk, pen trembling between his fingers, as if unsure whether to write or to stop pretending. On the desk lay a half-finished song, lyrics about light finding its way through darkness, but beside it was a letter that would become his final act of truth. The ink smudges told their own story, each word seemed written through tears. Outside, the thunder echoed, as though nature itself mourned a soul too gentle for its noise. He began writing not out of despair, but out of need, the need to finally speak without filters, without scripts, without pretending. 4 years, Every interview, every public appearance had been a performance. He had become an expert at looking okay. Every fan photo, every smile on set was a mask worn to protect not just his image, but everyone else's comfort. In the letter, he admitted he was tired of being everyone's sunshine while his own world was dimming. "I smiled for them," he wrote, "but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to smile for myself." That one line captured the invisible weight of his fame, the silent pressure to always be perfect, to never break. He had given his heart to a world that only loved him when he was happy. When the cameras turned off and the noise faded, what remained was a man alone with his thoughts, the same thoughts that would one day find their way onto that letter. The letter wasn't just written to fans, it was also to the people who had shared pieces of his life but never truly seen him. To the friend who said, "You're lucky to be famous," unaware of the sleepless nights behind that luck. To the ex-lover who said, "You've changed," never realizing that fame had forced him to. To the world that demanded a smile even when he was bleeding inside. He didn't blame anyone. He simply confessed how invisible pain can become when you're surrounded by applause. There were parts of the letter that felt almost cinematic, lines so raw they could have come from one of his own dramas. "Every night, I hear my own voice echoing in the silence," he wrote. "It's strange how fame makes the world louder, yet your heart quieter." He described walking through crowded streets and feeling utterly alone, how he could pass by hundreds of fans shouting his name and still feel unseen. It wasn't loneliness in the ordinary sense. It was emotional isolation, the kind that grows when you give everything away but keep nothing for yourself. He mentioned the way his eyes used to light up when he talked about music, about acting, about love, and how that light began to fade when everything he loved became something he had to do. There's a heartbreaking moment in his letter where he wrote, "I started performing offstage too." Those who read it said it felt like the line of a man who had lived too long in a world that rewarded masks more than truth. The most mysterious part of the letter was addressed to her. No one knows who she was, a lost love, a muse, or perhaps the person who once made him believe in forever. He wrote, "If you ever read this, please know you were the reason I held on longer than I should have." Those words, so intimate yet restrained, revealed a love that had quietly anchored him even as he drifted deeper into despair. Some believe she was the woman from his earlier years, the one he once described as the calm in my chaos. Others think she never knew the depth of his feelings. Whoever she was the heartbeat between his lines, the silent comfort in his storm. The rain that night seemed endless, washing against the city like tears that refused to dry. When investigators later described the scene, they said everything was meticulously arranged, as if he wanted the world to understand him one final time. The candle had burned halfway down. His phone was turned off. The letter was folded perfectly, placed beside a photo of him smiling on set years ago, a version of himself that no longer existed. What struck everyone most about the letter was its serenity. It wasn't written in rage or panic. It felt almost peaceful, like someone finally laying down a burden too heavy to carry. "I am not giving up," he wrote in one passage. "I am simply letting go." That line was both haunting and beautiful, a quiet acceptance of his exhaustion, not a surrender to despair. When the letter was released to the public, it became the most shared piece of writing in Asia for weeks. Every word seemed to speak directly to someone's hidden pain. People who had never met him found themselves crying over the honesty of a man who dared to admit what so many feel but never say. His fans began lighting candles outside his agency, leaving handwritten notes that said things like, "We hear you now, and you weren't invisible." In the aftermath, his colleagues spoke of how he used to sit quietly during breaks on set, lost in thought. They thought he was just tired, but in hindsight, they realized he was slipping away piece by piece. The letter forced everyone to confront a truth they had ignored, that sometimes the happiest-looking people are fighting the hardest battles. What makes his story unforgettable isn't just the tragedy, but the purity of his final message. He wasn't blaming the world. He was forgiving it. "Maybe it wasn't your fault you didn't see me," he wrote. "Maybe I hid too well." That line cut deep. a reflection of how easily we mistake strength for happiness and silence for peace. The last paragraph of his letter read like poetry. He wrote about the stars he used to watch as a child, how he believed they were the souls of those who had already found peace. "If you ever look up," he wrote, "and see one star that refuses to fade, maybe that's me, finally smiling for real." Those words have since been carved into memorials, quoted in fan letters, and whispered by those who still visit the places he once loved. To this day, people gather on his birthday, light candles, and read the letter aloud, as if by doing so, they could somehow reach him where he is now. In the end, the letter they found too late became more than just a goodbye. It became a lesson. It taught the world that behind every perfect picture, there could be pain. Behind every star, a storm. Menglong's letter was his final performance, not for applause, but for truth. And though the curtain closed that night, his words continued to echo, soft, steady, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that even the brightest souls can break when the world forgets to listen. Because somewhere between his ink and his silence, Menglong finally said what his heart had been trying to say all along. "I only wanted to be heard." And now, at last, he is.